Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akeridoluale, the headlines. Ukraine's Prosecutor General alleges torture of Ukrainians at the U.S. House of Representatives hearing. President Vladimir Putin orders government to address problems of delivering goods to regions annexed by Russia. And Poland grain reprieve offers little comfort Ukrainian farmers as they face rising prices and glut. Ukraine's Prosecutor General has testified to the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee in Washington, underscoring accusations of war crimes, torture, and other human rights violations he asserts that Russia is inflicting upon Ukrainians. Andre Kostin told the bipartisan committee that Ukraine has registered almost 80,000 cases of war crimes with evidence to support the accusations, adding that many of these are related to torture. Mr. Kostin also called for an international tribunal against the crime of aggression, which Democratic Representatives Bill Keating introduced in a House resolution. Although the International Criminal Court can prosecute war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide in Ukraine, it cannot prosecute the crime of aggression due to legal constraints.
Today, we have registered close to 80,000 cases of war crimes. Evidence of these crimes, however, is growing exponentially. Torture chambers. We have discovered approximately 20 such locations and even more unlawful detention facilities. Over 1,000 torture chamber survivors submitted their evidences. Survivors report that Russian forces subjected them to different forms of abuse, including beating with sticks and rubber batons, use of electric shocks, waterboarding, stripping them naked, threats of death or mutilation, and others.
Based on these discussions that we've had, I introduced House Res 81, calling on the President to support the creation of a special tribunal for the punishment of crimes of aggression against Ukraine. Today, as you've heard in previous hearings, you again demonstrate a clear foundation of evidence that you've established showing the atrocity of these crimes and for the crime of aggression. And I strongly urge this committee to take up this piece of legislation quickly because it's of its urgent nature.
Потім мене повезли в їхню катівню, де тримали 5 днів.
And then they took me to their torture chamber and kept me there for 5 days.
Це був страшний кошмар, мене били.
This was terrible. I was beaten.
Змушували роздягатись.
Forced me to undress.
Різали ножем, погрожували зґвалтувати і вбити.
Cutting my body with a knife and threatening to rape and kill me.
Вивозили у поле, там знову били, ставили на коліна, приставляли пістолет до голови.
I also was taken out into the field and they beated me again and they were putting a handgun next to my head and shooting as if executing me.
І врешті змушували копати собі могилу.
Also forced me to dig my own grave.
Of course, it's important to point out that these are accusations made by Ukraine against Russia. In the meantime, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega has received the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Managua, the capital. Mr. Ortega and Mr. Lavrov, amidst delegations from both countries, met at the Olive Palm Convention Center. After the meeting, Mr. Lavrov spoke to the media and highlighted close ties between Russia and Nicaragua. He also thanked the country for its support in promoting Russia with Latin American integration organizations. Nicaragua is a close ally of Mr. Putin, and President Ortega has been vocal about his support for the Russians amidst the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And back in Russia itself, Russian President Vladimir Putin says that delivering goods to regions of Ukraine that Russia annexed last year was, quote, problematic, and ordered the government to address the problem. According to the Kremlin, Mr. Putin visited Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine's Luhansk and Kherson regions earlier this week. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk are the 4 regions that Mr. Putin proclaimed annexed last September, following what Ukraine said were sham referendums. Russian forces only partly control the 4 regions.
Вы знаете наверняка, что буквально там день назад я побывал и в Херсонской области, и в Луганской. Вот там много вопросов, не буду к ним возвращаться.
Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry says Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has inspected the Yars strategic missile systems in the Kaluga region south of Moscow. The missile base visited by General Shoigu and the Strategic Missile Force Commander Sergei Karakayev is the first one which is armed with new Yars silo-based missile systems. According to reports, General Shoigu was briefed on the combat capabilities of the missiles. And in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has inspected the frontier with Belarus and Poland and thanked border guards for their defense of the country since Russia's invasion. The president posted video footage that shows him meeting border guards in woodland with barbed wire fencing besides a river in the Volyn region of northwestern Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky said after discussing with border protection measures at a meeting in January that Ukraine must, quote, be ready at the frontier with Belarus, even though Kiev did not see anything powerful there apart from statements. Russia used Belarus as a launchpad for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February last year, and President Vladimir Putin had said that Russia would now station tactical nuclear weapons on its close allies' territory. In a separate post, Mr. Zelensky said he had discussed security and socio-economic issues with political and military leaders in the Volyn region as well. Bulgaria has introduced a temporary ban on Ukraine grain exports, except for those in transit, and that's according to its caretaker Prime Minister Galab Dunev. Large quantities of Ukrainian grain have been trapped in Eastern and Central Europe as low global prices and demand meant grain cannot easily be sold on. The bottlenecks, reduced prices and sales by local farmers, putting political pressure on governments in the region. Hungary, Poland and Slovakia have imposed bans to protect their markets from an influx of cheaper supply following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Romania has also said it would take action. Meanwhile, Ukrainian farmer Vladimir Bondaruk takes little comfort from Poland's decision to lift a ban on the transit of Ukrainian grain. His mixed dairy and arable farm in western Ukraine has already lost a Polish contract, and he doubts it will ever be renewed. Bondaruk is already struggling to find markets for the wheat, rapeseed, oilseed, corn and sugar beet produced on his 10-hectare farm in western Ukraine's agricultural belt.
If
the procedure means that the shipping of grain will be just monitored on its way to the port, then it is scenario number 1. But if a farmer needs to deposit some money until the grain reaches the port in Nantes, for example, and can only collect a deposit after the grain reaches the contractor, then for small farmers who own from 100 to 1,000 hectares, it will be extremely difficult. Price for petrol has risen, price for pesticides has risen, mineral fertilizers, they make the main chunk in the expenses. That's why it is not easy for us these days. I would like farmers and agricultural lobby in the eastern countries to understand that we face similar problems. We don't ask for subsidies. We don't want anything like that. Just help us to sell our goods. We have another problem related to sales of goods. We have leftovers from 2022 harvesting. In the previous years, we exported a lot of corn, wheat and other grain to the Middle East countries, African countries. But today, because of the war, ports do not accept big amounts of goods.
Ukrainian farmer Vladimir Bondaruk. Romania's agricultural minister Petru Dar says the European Union is preparing a package of 100 million euros of support and plans to introduce restrictions on imports of Ukrainian grain, but will only apply them if 4 Central and Eastern members reverse unilateral bans on such imports. Speaking after an online meeting with his counterparts from Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the EU commissioners, PoliticsToday said the EU could introduce the measures within 48 hours after the bans had been reversed.
Comisari au prezentat un pachet de sprijin pe care Comisia îl pune la dispoziția celor 5 țări compus din 100 de milioane.
The 2 commissioners presented a support package that the Commission is making available to the 5 countries, which are Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, consisting of 100 euros from the European Commission's Crisis Reserve. With this amount to be distributed in the next period, and a package to regulate imports from Ukraine. It provides for the activation of exceptional safeguarding mechanism, which means stopping imports until June 5 for the following products: wheat, corn, sunflower seeds, and rapeseed. The Commissioner mentioned that this measure can be taken within 48 hours after the states that have taken unilateral measures withdraw them. Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis bluntly stated that the unilateral measures taken by the 4 European states are illegal. They contravene the accession treaties and the association agreement concluded between the EU and Ukraine, calling on all the 4 states to withdraw them. Otherwise, the Commission's proposal will not be applied.
In Russia, opposition activist Ilya Yashin predicted he would one day help build a, quote, new and free Russia after losing his appeal against an 8.5-year sentence on the charge of spreading false information about the army. Mr. Yashin, a longtime ally of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny, was arrested in June of 2022 for statements that he made on his YouTube channel about war crimes allegedly committed by Russian forces in the Kiev suburb of Bucha. Moscow denies that its forces have committed war crimes or attacked civilians in what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine, saying such allegations have been fabricated to damage its reputation. Mr. Yashin's appeal was turned down 2 days after his fellow Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza was jailed for 25 years on charges of treason and also, like Mr. Yashin, knowingly spreading false information. And Washington has urged Turkey and Hungary to quickly ratify Sweden's NATO membership bid, which has been blocked for months due to a series of disputes with the 2 nations. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, on a visit to Sweden said, "We look forward to soon welcoming Sweden as the 32nd member of NATO, and to be clear, we look forward to that happening before the NATO summit in July." Highlighting the U.S. support for Sweden, General Austin said the U.S. had increased its military presence in the Scandinavian country. Ending 2 centuries of neutrality and military non-alignment, Sweden and neighboring Finland announced bids to join NATO in May of 2022 in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But while Finland managed to become the 31st member of NATO on April the 4th, Sweden's bid still faces significant opposition. Let's talk now to Alexei Ishak, head of Sector, National Institute for Strategic Studies. He joins us virtually from Ukraine. Good morning to you, Alexei. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Good morning to you.
Now, this issue of grain seems to be a developing fault line between Ukraine and some of its neighbors, possibly unintended, because Ukraine's grain is not supposed to be going to the neighbors. It's mostly for export to other parts of the world, but it is getting stuck in some of these countries, and because of the war and other things, it's quite difficult to get it out of those places. And now pressure is coming from the farmers in those countries because Ukraine grain is said to be cheaper. Now, how do you see this being resolved? Because it seems that more and more countries through which the grain could be passing are introducing this kind of bans to protect their local farmers?
The main reason for this problem is that Russia throttle usual way of export its sea route from Ukraine through Black Sea and through Black Sea channels of Turkey, and Russia throttle this route. So European Commission maybe a half year ago created possibility alternative route and alternative possibility for export of Ukrainian grain. European Commission removed quotas on European grain for some countries, and also provided some land logistics for export. And now it happens that it changed market. It brought losses to farmers from Eastern Europe, and simultaneously Russia continues to throttle sea route for Ukrainian grain. So just now, I think the main way to resolve the problem is providing special funds from European funds to compensate losses of Eastern European farmers. And also we can see efforts continue to make sea route more safe and working better, because Russia continues to handicap this export of Ukrainian grain through Turkish channels.
Now, Ukraine's Prosecutor General, while all of this is going on, Ukraine's Prosecutor General is in the United States. His visit has been highly publicized. He met with the U.S. Attorney General earlier this week, and after that, he's briefed the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on these matters. But practically speaking, this war has shown no signs of slowing down or stopping. In fact, the Ukrainians are said to be preparing another offensive at the moment. But the question is this. Most of the evidence that is said to have been gathered and which has been submitted to the prosecutor so that whenever it is that these prosecutions will happen, isn't there a threat here that a lot of it will be tainted, affected? Some of the witnesses may in fact, have emigrated or in some instances died as a result of this conflict. How easy is it going to be to keep all this evidence and all the testimony intact for whenever the war ends?
It's not easy, but it's not new effort to get the evidence and to organize prosecution after the war. At least several months, prosecutors from different countries visit Ukraine, cooperate with Ukraine's law enforcement and prosecutor officer to gather this evidence. So this process is not just started. We have a process in development, and there are a lot of not a lot, but several propositions about how to deal with it after the war. And the same fact that this process is underway hint us that end of this war is closing, and I would say civilization would have this problem to restore justice in this war. But to my view, it should be some big decision like Nuremberg Tribunal or Rwanda Tribunal. It should be something special. And now we hear that United States support this creation of special tribunals. But there are another options, and European Union proposes a bit different options. But in any way, this process is underway. Evidences are gathered. There are so many of them that in any case it will be enough to start prosecution. And all this process hints us that the war is is going to its end, to my view.
In that kind of situation, and now that's coming to the battlefield proper. We're receiving reports that Ukraine has received the first set of U.S. Patriot missiles that were promised much earlier on, this, is about the first. A lot of things were promised to Ukraine late last year, early this year, but there's been problems with delivery. There's been delays in terms of timing. The weather hasn't helped in Ukraine, from everything we have been told, for mounting the counteroffensive that many expected. But while everyone is waiting for that, this leak happened in the United States. This leak of defense papers, which talked about strategy and so on of helping Ukraine and its allies. Do you think that introduced any kind of trust issue between Ukraine and particularly the United States?
Yes, it's a problem, but I don't think it's a big problem. It's not as big as it was during WikiLeaks by Assange of these diplomatic documents. And so it's not so big. Yes, it's a problem of faith, of communication. But generally, to my view, all this leak just creates strategic uncertainty for Russia. Russia cannot understand what is going on because these leaks are dubious. They don't have any clear information about what, when, and how. It's just information that preparation is underway, and there are some problems in preparation for Ukrainian counteroffensive and the occupation of territories. And everyone knows that there are two big problems. One is delivery of weapons, and another problem is preparation of troops for this big delivery. And we know that at least from last summer, this process of preparation of Ukrainian troops, 9 brigades in our partners and 3 brigades in Ukraine, it's underway and it's closer to the end. So no one knows when exactly, but it's clear that preparation for Ukrainian counter-offensive is closer and closer. And one day it happened without any announcement. Our authorities in Ukraine say that you will just see that it began. It will not be any official declaration that the Ukrainian counteroffensive started. So I'm optimistic about it, and I don't think that this leak of Pentagon documents is detrimental to counteroffensive. I would say here it's a lack of information operation to deceive our enemy.
Indeed. Now, you are in Dnipro, and the reports we are receiving is that in the last couple of days, barring isolated incidents, there appears to be a lull outside of Bakhmut. There appears to be a lull in the fighting. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians seem to have taken a break. Pardon me if I use that phrase. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. You are in Dnipro. The Russians are on the other side of the Dnieper River, and the Ukrainians are on this side of it. Now, can I ask, does that have any real effect on everyday life where you are? Ability to access goods, medicine, things like that, watch TV, go about your daily activities. This lull, is it real, or is it everybody just waiting for where next something will happen?
Okay, from the mid of February, it's pretty good. We have running water, we have electricity all the day, so it's much better. And except depression of population, it's obvious when population when country is under war, population is in some sort of depression and not happy to say. But in terms of everyday services, it's good in Dnipro. It's maybe 200 kilometers from front. It's not war city. It's not place of war, and many Ukrainian cities like Dnipro are pretty good in living condition. But of course, we are waiting for this big Ukrainian counter-offensive, and during this period, it's obvious that Russia would try to deliver strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure in depth of territory. And but our hope are on patriots, not only Americans, but also 4 countries provided us with patriots and a lot of other counter-air defense. So our hopes are on air defense, and the situation is pretty good just now.
One will only hope that it stays that way and improves as time goes on. Oleksiy Ishak, thank you for your time this morning, and do continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
And after the break, Ukraine's defense ministry excited as it receives first shipment of U.S. Patriots. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. The United States airman accused of leaking highly classified Pentagon documents will remain in jail for at least another 2 weeks after his lawyers asked for a delay in the hearing on his detention to give them more time to prepare. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira made a brief appearance in federal court in Boston and waived his right to a preliminary hearing, an early court proceeding in which prosecutors present some evidence to show that charges are warranted. His defense had said it requires more time to address the issues presented by the government's request for detention. A judge had ordered Mr. Teixeira last week to remain in custody until a detention hearing is held. He has not entered a plea of guilty or not guilty as yet. And the head of the military command of the Odessa region, Yuri Kruk, says Russian drones struck Ukraine's southern Odessa region and caused a fire at an infrastructure facility. Ukraine's Operational Command South released a video showing firefighters working on site of damaged buildings and what appears to be drone parts with a sign reading "Do not touch" in Russian. However, no casualties have been reported and firefighters were still working at the scene. Britain says any intimidation of foreign nationals by China or other states on its soil is unacceptable as it responded to a media report about a secret Chinese police station. Britain has previously said that reports of undeclared police stations in the country were extremely concerning and the police were looking into the issue. This week, United States federal agents arrested 2 New York residents for allegedly operating a Chinese secret police station in the Chinatown district of Manhattan. China has said it firmly opposes what it calls the United States slanders and smears. Kiev says it has received the first shipment of the American-made Patriot surface-to-air missile systems and deployed light armored fighting vehicles sent by France as it prepares for a major counter-offensive against Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Rezhnikov wrote in a Twitter post which reads, "Today our beautiful Ukrainian sky becomes more secure because Patriot air defense systems have arrived in Ukraine." He adds that the United States, Germany and the Netherlands had kept their word after promising to provide Ukraine with a defense system as Russia launched air attacks against critical energy infrastructure. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said the system will significantly strengthen Ukraine's defense against Russian strikes. Let's talk to Onyekachi Adekoya, a security consultant, joining us from Maiduguri, the Borno State capital, another hotbed of security, if one is to say so, much closer to home. Morning to you, Onyekachi. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Ladi, and good morning to the viewers.
So much has been said about this issue of the Ukrainian counter-offensive. Now we're hearing that Patriot missiles have finally arrived, which will keep the sky more secure. And then a couple of fighting vehicles have also arrived from France, the US, and the Netherlands. But, and that's the big but here, is that enough to launch this counteroffensive, do you think?
I don't think that the Patriot missile defense system can do so much for the Ukrainians at this time. Of course, anything they can get now, they will gladly receive. But I think what the Patriot missile systems will do would be to provide point protection for critical assets in Kiev. Of course, as the last speaker said, we know that once the purported offensive starts, Russia may try to launch certain precision strikes against command centers in the western region of Ukraine. But the Patriot missile defense system cannot protect against Russia's hypersonic missile systems. We've seen Russia deploy at least 12 of them in this conflict. There are some reports, although not fully confirmed, that at the last time Russia deployed these missile systems, it took out a significant detachment of NATO advisors in the western part of Ukraine. Although both sides to this conflict are kind of washing out that information, so it doesn't lead to a broader conflict. But again, anything in Ukraine is fair target for the Russian missile systems, particularly once it's aiding Ukraine in its ongoing war. So I don't see what the Patriot missile systems will do. They don't have enough to create like a defense in depth. More or less like the defense umbrella in depth across different critical parts of Ukraine. So it's good to have for Ukraine, but doesn't create much defense. In terms of the main battle tanks and the aid vehicles they are receiving from the West, some of them have started arriving in the front in Bakhmut. We are also seeing reports of destruction of some of these systems, particularly by the Russian land-sent drone, the kamikaze drone. So it will look as though Russia, since the start of this operation, has fairly adapted to the NATO systems, some of the systems in the West, and they seem to be on the front foot, particularly in the Adivka region, where they're making what looks to be like a current offensive going on within that axis. So, yeah, I don't know how much of what the Western systems can do to help Ukraine, and how much and how far they can go in this counteroffensive, because it looks as though Russia is planning a counteroffensive post Ukraine's own offensive. And if you looked at the way they've mobilized, they seem to have reserves in depth for that strategy, and having munitions also in depth, waiting for when perhaps they think that this will be the last straw of the dice for the Ukrainian army, after which they may have no gas left in the tank, and then Russia will just move in. So I think both sides are trying to play at a strategy, hoping to see which side gets the upper hand.
There is, of course, as you say that, and it's quite interesting that you say that, because the Russians are also preparing. I mean, the president of Russia was in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia earlier on this week to inspect some things. General Shoigu, the defense minister, is also there as we speak. We saw a visual of him and some of the top commanders a little while ago visiting some of the key areas. So they're also preparing. We had been told earlier that they're going to place tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. We have not seen evidence that that has happened yet. On the other hand, the Ukrainians have gotten a few MiG-29s from some countries, and so I don't know if that's part of the counteroffensive. If you know, you'll tell us. But it does look as if, certainly, when you mention last throw of the dice, there's going to be a lot of destruction coming. And after that, maybe both parties, including their supporters, may not really have that much gas left. And then, you know, what will we now be talking about?
Yeah, Ladi, I think that there's a lot of influence operation in the Western media. When I say influence operation, I just mean the bulk of it is all propaganda, the way we assess it. Russia is no longer the superpower that the Soviet Union once was. But in the last decade, Russia has shown itself to be a great world power, and that you cannot take away from Russia. Now, the problem with fighting a proxy war with a great world power at its doorstep is that Russia has entrenched communication and supply lines to its troops across the over 800 kilometers front line. Now, what analysts are assessing is that Ukraine's counteroffensive at best may achieve some momentary gain of land, but it will come at a huge cost in terms of manpower equipment. And Russia is also gambling that this will happen. For which, for example, Russia produces over, what's the estimate, about 17 million shells, or can produce about 17 million shells of artillery a year, and they're consuming about 6 million a year in Ukraine. Russia has hypersonic missile systems. It's not even used some of the old Soviet stock of tanks. We're seeing new main battle tanks being put in the front line. It has this multiple launch rocket system. So Russia has almost outgone Ukraine since the start of this battle 10-1. And we have not seen Russia fully use its full destructive capacity. We've just seen the introduction of the 1,500 bombs, which are dome bombs, but have now been retrofitted to become glide bombs. And those are very destructive, targeting hardened points of the Ukrainian army along the lines of contact. It's just not a very interesting time for Ukraine, because Ukraine has lost so much in this war, and I don't see what Ukraine gets out of this. And Ukraine seems to be smack in the middle between a great power and a superpower in the place of America and NATO. And Russia, for its part, has prepared all its lifetime for war with NATO. We must understand the depth in preparation that Russia has had, even during the eras of the Cold War. And Russia has been the successor in title to all the assets and technology of the Soviet Union. So Russia is no pushover. NATO and the West have propped up Ukraine since 2014. At the last estimate, it looks as though there's been over $100 billion worth of investment of equipment into Ukraine. Ukraine may have lost, by some estimates, 400-something aircraft. We're not sure what difference 11 aircraft would make, in this phase of the war. So, like I've said from the get-go, this will resolve in some form of diplomatic settlements at a peace negotiation table. But I think that both sides want to see as much damage they can afflict on the other side before they come to that negotiating point. While we wait for that negotiation to occur, the sad part of what is happening is that for the sides that are propping up Ukraine with weapons, and for Russia that is the true aggressor, but the aggression instigated by NATO, I don't see how we give any of the sides a pat on the shoulder, because what is happening is a great shame. There's a great loss of life. If you look at the whole of the eastern Ukraine, so much destruction, So, Vladi, there's this whole thing of a geopolitical ramification to this conflict is all the politics of interest, and for me, it's not what the loss of life or the destruction. So there's a bigger game at play beyond Russia and Ukraine. That's just what I want to say. And this whole talk of a counteroffensive, this counteroffensive will lead to more destruction, and it will lead to no significant gain on the part of Ukraine. Because Russia, if you compare Russia to a boxer, Russia's fighting style is endurance. Russia will take you for the long endurance fight, maybe 14 rounds, 16 rounds fight, before it will then eventually deal its own knockout. Russia can give as much as it can take. in this battle we're seeing, and Ukrainians and the people in the middle of this conflict will be the ones who suffer the most. There's no right, there's no wrong side to this, and I do hope that Africa will continue to look at this with very clear eye, without any assumptions.
I'm very happy you also mentioned the fact that there's a bigger game at play here, and this is a proxy war. Everyone involved has said so. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians will be the ones who bear the brunt, who have been bearing the brunt, and who will continue to bear the brunt largely of this conflict. But there's a bigger game in play here, and that is the one between the Russians and NATO. Now, Russia says it went into Ukraine to prevent NATO from being at its doorstep. But since that happened, you've got Finland and Sweden. Finland is already in. Everyone wants to get in Sweden now. Now, that enlarges Russia's borders and brings NATO closer. But Russia is a big country. Russia is bigger in terms of size than all the other countries that are in NATO in Europe, outside of the United States. So again, one wants to wonder, what is the end game here? What is NATO's end game here? Is it to encircle Russia and eventually, like dominate it? And what will be the Russians' reactions to being encircled if eventually that is what happens in this bigger game?
Yeah, Ladi, I can tell you for free that there will be no war against Russia and NATO. There will be absolutely no war. NATO cannot afford a war with Russia. Russia cannot afford a war with NATO. So Finland can join NATO for all Russia cares. And all Russia would do would just be to move some military detachments. They would gauge the risk and, of course, deploy some systems to the border with Finland. Sweden can join for all Russia may care, in as much as Russia does not like it. The game would be to, of course, put Russia in a corner and then begin to apply some economic pressure against the Russian states to weaken it, because we are now shifting into a multipolar world. And for now, since the early 90s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've had a unipolar liberal democracy world, with America being the superpower. But now we have other great powers rising. India, China, even Brazil having a say, South Africa. So what happened with the Soviet Union would not happen with Russia, the way we assess it, because it was not necessarily the Americans that took down the Soviet Union. But what we don't also appreciate is the part that the Saudis played in bringing down the Soviet Union. In the scenario today, the Saudis are now aligned with BRICS, and rather than pump more crude to crash the price of crude at the international market, you can see OPEC trying to stabilize the market, because America has also become a competitor to the cartel OPEC. So there's a whole lot of moving parts. I do think, like I said initially, that all the sides to this conflict had underestimated the preparation of the other side. Putin started to prepare for this conflict with NATO since 2008, just about the time he made that famous speech at the Munich conference in 2008. And Putin has had the time to make all this preparation. Fortuitously for the Russians, America also became energy independent, to becoming a net exporter of energy, pitching it against OPEC. So there's a whole lot of back and forth. Again, you have the issues of sanctions and the sanctions regime, and how that there's also the geopolitics of sanctions, the weaponization of the dollar system and international trade, and the challenges it brings up. Misery, they say, likes to also have its own company. So there's a whole lot of things going on in this new multipolar world that doesn't necessarily give NATO any superior advantage at the border of Russia, because Russia, for its part, has the best, most sophisticated missile systems and missile defense systems, can strike at very long range. So their stand-up munition system is very good and can provide that punch they need to reach any part of NATO. And in the case of a nuclear conflict, of course, what we'll have is a nuclear winter. That's why if you listen to Donald Trump, he said that the greatest threat to the world is not global warming, but a nuclear catastrophe. So Finland, Sweden can join NATO, but I don't see that as a existential threat to Russia. We're not in the early 19th century or the late 18th century where the Germans attacked from Poland or Finland allied themselves, and then became a source of entrance into St. Petersburg. No, all that times have changed. There is China, there is India, there is the BRICS, there are other geopolitical considerations leading the world into a multipolar world. So I think that the over-militarization of NATO's foreign policy, America's foreign policy, has come to a head. And it doesn't, at this point, give NATO any additional benefits in cornering Russia within the Baltics. No, it doesn't, because NATO is now overextending itself within the South China Sea, trying also now to tilt towards China. So NATO is somewhat doing too much at the same time. At the period where we have a global financial crisis, we're also experiencing a global commodity super cycle. So now is not a good time for conflict, and there is not going to be any clear-cut winner in this geopolitical context between the current superpower, which is the US, and the rising great powers, which want to now form a multipolar global system. So I think that's my reading to it. There's nothing much to see. And if you follow the history of wars in Europe, you see that alliances shift. And then they shift again, depending on interests and other political considerations. So nothing to see there for now.
Absolutely. Oyekachi Adekoya, as always, interesting perspective. Thank you for your time on the program this morning. It's been a pleasure having you, and do stay safe out there in Maiduguri.
Maiduguri is actually very safe. Vladi, you should visit.
All right, then. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Have a pleasant day ahead.
You too. Thank you, Jess.
And when we return, NBA star Laurie McKinnon undertaking military service in Finland. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ini John McQuarrie of our business desk is here. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
Russia is planning to resolve a payment problem with India.
Yes.
Considering that they're doing a roaring trade at the moment, this is good news for the Russians.
And the Indians.
Okay, and the Indians too, actually.
Yeah, so obviously they've been doing a lot of transactions, and India has been asking that they pay in rupees. But most of it has actually been in rubles. So India is feeling that they should also have a bit of that. And then, of course, you know that most of it is oil and gas. India is buying from Russia. So they've been having series of meetings from both ends. Russia going to, I think the Chamber of Commerce was in India, and vice versa, and all of that. So they're thinking of, instead of moving physical cash or electronic cash, whichever, what they are planning to do now is that Russia will use most of the proceeds, most of their earnings, to establish industries and companies in India. So that way, they will have a Russian-owned company in India converting some of those things that they normally buy. So they now have to export it. So it will now serve as export from India to Russia.
Some people are actually thinking here. People are actually, because again, the Russians, we've talked about this down the months. The Russians seem to have some strategic thinkers looking at the economy. I had to take
some time to go and read about the central bank governor in Russia. I'm so glad she's a woman.
There we go.
No, but she's doing so well. You know, I mean, we are not encouraging the war or anything like that, but we've seen Russia come up with very genius ways of dealing with a whole lot of things, beginning some business transactions, creating new routes that, I mean, people didn't really think about before now. I mean, look at it in this case. Instead of India just paying for the oil and gas they're buying, they use it to establish Russian-owned companies
in India. In which case, this is more of a formal business.
Yes,
that is properly...
and they get raw materials from India, and they also get cheap labor from India. India has the population. So, I mean, these are very genius ways of dealing with some of this.
While all that is going on, Russia is going to start mining Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Because you guys are sanctioning Russia. You don't want them to do their international trade with your dollars. So they want to use cryptocurrency. And they're still skeptical about domestic use of cryptocurrencies. So in-house, people can use digital rubles or e-transactions, but not cryptocurrency. But when it comes to international, then they want to start mining Bitcoin.
The authorities themselves.
Yes, because they are allowed to do that. You may not be able to regulate all of the movement and transactions, but they can actually mine and use it to transact. You know, so they're trying to do that to, you know, I think the US and other European countries and the West, they have a lot of thinking to do, because it seems Russia isn't sleeping. They're looking for different ways to circumvent this sanction.
And the economy, the other day I was having a chat with Laddie, and he said, look, the economy at no point it's doing as bad as was expected, given the weight of the pressure.
Ukraine GDP is out and is down about 3% or so. And, you know, we shouldn't be surprised, but we should also be feeling the sanction from the Russian end also. But they seem to be, even if it's a buffer up, even if it's a cover up they're doing it so well that the ruble, yesterday the ruble recovered, you know, based on oil. The tighter oil, the other day we're talking about how India might even be ready to pay for oil more than $60, because as they're stifling production, price is going up. India is still depending on Russia. They've cut their ties with Iraq, which used to be their major producer. So, you know, they can, at the end of the day, still buy the normal price of oil from Russia. And so Russia is still making some money, even from that front.
Well, talking about making money, Ini and her team, of course, will have all the other money-making methods of today on Business Morning and Business Incorporated. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
And just before we go, let's take a final look at some of the sports here. Utah Jazz All-Star forward Lauri Markkanen is undertaking military service in Finland following the conclusion of his NBA season. Earlier this week, the Jazz posted a photo on social media of Markkanen reporting for military service, while the 25-year-old uploaded a photo of his new buzz cut to Instagram, reassuring followers that his curls will be back. Speaking to reporters about a week after Utah was eliminated from playoff contention, Markkanen said that this military service is mandatory in Finland before the age of 30, adding that he doesn't know exactly how long he will spend on military service over the coming months, but that he has the option to complete it across 2 summers. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Laddie Akeredolu. Do have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Morning.